An unforgettable memory at Seattle's seafood market. I will never forget that suffocating afternoon in the heart of downtown Seattle, right inside the legendary Pike Place Seafood Market. I was 22 and still naive enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, my family could pull itself back together. The market was alive with the sounds of hawkers tossing salmon through the air, shouts of fresh catch, and wide-eyed tourists crowding every stall. The air was thick with salt and expectation. I remember trailing behind my mother, Susan, my father, David, and my older sister, Amber, who always led the pack with her designer purse and perfect hair. I clutched my sketchbook, still hoping for a chance to capture the kaleidoscope of colors and faces all around us. Every so often I'd pause, desperate to catch the curve of a fishmonger's hand or the gleam off an ice-packed heap of oysters. But Amber would throw me one of her patented glares. "God, Jessica, do you always have to make everything about you?" She spat, loud enough for people to glance our way. I pretended not to notice. I pretended I was used to it. For weeks before this family trip, I had fantasized that this might be the thaw, the chance for my parents to finally see me, not as the family failure, but as someone worth having around. They'd agreed to come to the market partly because I begged, and partly because Amber had found a new seafood restaurant she was dying to try. By late morning, I was already trailing, ignored, annoyance mounting in their eyes. Every time I pulled out my pencil, it happened fast. One minute, I was kneeling by a vendor's stall, sketching an ancient fisherman with a face like driftwood. The next, I looked up and my family was gone. I called out, once, twice, my voice drowned by the swirl of the market. No answer. Wild panic flashed through me. I searched every direction, pushing through tourists, my heart ramming against my ribs. My backpack felt suddenly heavier. I reached for my wallet. Gone. I remembered, with a sickening thud, that my mother had insisted on holding the important stuff. My wallet, passport, even my phone charger. Since I lose everything, my phone was down to 8%. Desperation set in. Finally, wobbling on the edge of tears, I spotted a row of ancient payphones across the street. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped the receiver. I dialed Amber's number, praying at least she would answer. Her voice came through fuzzy. "What, Jessica?" she sighed. I explained, stammering, that I was alone. No money, no idea where they were. "You're always bothering everyone, Jessica. Get it together." Behind her words, I heard laughter. My mom's, rich and unbothered. "This is your fault, Jessica," Susan crowed, and the line went dead in a burst of static. I remember standing there, the phone pressed to my ear, as the world spun. I could still hear them laughing, as if I'd just delivered the punchline to a family joke. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten me. No, this was a choice. My own family thought it was funny to leave me stranded in a crowded Seattle market with nothing. People brushed by, their arms full of shopping bags, not noticing the girl whose family had just ripped the floor out from under her. I remember staring at the sea of strangers, the acrid smell of fish mingling with humiliation in my nose, and wondering what it was about me that made the people who were supposed to love me most decide I was disposable. I stayed frozen by that payphone for what felt like hours. The market's commotion warping and receding. Each time my phone buzzed, Amber sending a dismissive text, my mom's laughing voice on a voicemail. I felt a new sting. They tried to downplay it. "It's just a little joke. Come find us if you care enough." But there was no address, no hint, not even a chance. For all their talk about tough love, it was never about helping me grow up. It was just about reminding me where I stood. Always one step outside the circle. Always less welcome, less loved. I wished I could say I was angry. At them, at the universe, at myself for thinking things could be different. But mostly, I felt numb. The old, familiar ache of being excluded, swelling into something that filled every crevice of my chest. Only later would anger come, bubbling up into the resolve that would carry me out of that market and onto a new path. But right then, in the middle of the world's most famous seafood market, with salmon arcing through the air and vendors barking deals to people who belonged, I was just a girl whose family had, for the last time, decided she could be left behind. Growing up under pressure in suburban Seattle, my childhood in Redmond, a sleepy, manicured suburb just outside Seattle, was the kind of all-American dream that looked perfect from the outside. Neat lawns, birthday parties at the local rec center, neighbors who waved politely as they backed out of their driveways. But inside my family's two-story house, with blue shutters and an impeccably trimmed hedge, I was living under a weight that was invisible to everyone else. Amber, my older sister by 5 years, was the undisputed star of our household. By the age of 27, she was already climbing the ranks at a tech-focused financial firm downtown. Even as a kid, Amber was the golden child, smart, poised, and, most irritatingly, endlessly praised for her ambition and charm. Her trophies, science fairs, debate club, mathletes, decorated the living room shelves, each one like a tiny spotlight, constantly reminding me where I didn't measure up. My mom, Susan, was the self-chosen chief operations officer of our home. She ran a tight ship, orchestrating everything from carpool schedules to class bake sales with military precision. To her, image was everything. She'd glare at my paint-stained jeans and disheveled hair, muttering under her breath about what the neighbors must think. In her eyes, the physical evidence of my art, sketchbooks scattered across my room, smudges of charcoal on my shirt, wasn't just messy. It was embarrassing. My father, David, a soft-spoken software engineer, wasn't mean exactly, but his silence weighed more than any of Susan's sharp words. Most nights, he retreated behind a fortress of code and printouts, only rarely glancing up to offer a nod or a half-hearted, "How was your day?" When Susan criticized me, telling me to try being more like Amber, he never intervened. That lack of support, never being chosen, always being passed over, hurt in a way I couldn't explain. Art was my escape, my oxygen. From the time I could hold a crayon, I'd lose myself for hours, drawing faces and landscapes on whatever scraps I could find. I dreamt in color, in line, imagining myself one day painting murals in the city, or seeing my sketches in a real gallery. But instead of encouragement, my family saw my passion as a flaw. "You'll never make a living doodling," Susan would snap, flinging my sketchbook onto the countertop if it appeared during dinner preparation. "Stop acting like a child." Amber never missed a chance to twist the knife. Whenever guests visited, she'd parade stories about her latest achievements, rolling her eyes when anyone even hinted at my art. "Jessica's still chasing her pipe dreams," she'd say, with a grin, dismissing me in front of people I admired. It stung, but what could I do? Her words seemed to confirm what the rest of the family already believed, that I was a nice enough kid, but nothing special. School wasn't much better. Most of my classmates dreamed of internships at Microsoft or gone to the moon tech startups. I was one of the few majoring in fine arts at the University of Washington. My classes were small and intimate, full of paint-splattered students with big dreams and even bigger doubt. I spent my afternoons pouring coffee at a busy downtown cafe, saving every tip for supplies, paints, textured papers, charcoal. Every night I carried a growing sense of guilt that I was letting my entire family down by not following the smart path. At home, the pressure was relentless. Every dinner conversation revolved around Amber's next milestone, or my lack of a real plan. Family photos were a showcase of forced smiles and strained eyes. One perfect daughter, one disappointment. It was as if every hope and expectation in that house had been invested in Amber, and I was simply the reminder of all the risks that came with dreaming outside the script. In quiet, private moments, I wondered if there was something wrong with me, if my desire to create art was some character defect, a stubbornness I should have grown out of by now. Some nights, staring at my ceiling, I'd think, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm never going to be enough. But, despite the constant pressure, or maybe because of it, I kept drawing. My art was the one place I didn't have to compete with Amber, didn't have to justify my worth. In every brushstroke, I found a little piece of freedom, even as the world inside my family's blue-shuttered house tried to squeeze it out of me. Looking back, I realize I was surviving, not living, always hoping one day they'd recognize not just what I made, but who I was. No safe haven, betrayal from love and family. In my world, family had never really felt like home. Yet, the real crack in my foundation didn't come from my parents' indifference or my sister's relentless condescension. It came, suddenly and quietly, from the kind of love I'd always hoped would be safe. Romantic love. For a long time, I convinced myself that maybe, if love from family was conditional and prickly, I could at least find belonging with someone who wasn't bound by blood. When I met Matt Reynolds at the crowded counter of that coffee shop near the University of Washington campus, it felt, ridiculously and naively, like fate had finally cut me a break. Matt was a senior, majoring in business, driven in the way only those with something to prove can be. He brimmed with a kind of ambition that made people listen when he spoke. And in the beginning, he listened to me, too. At first, he was fascinated by my art, how my hands would move across paper in nervous, searching lines, how my apartment was cluttered with canvases and paint tubes. We'd stay up late in his dorm, sprawled on the threadbare rug, talking about dreams. His full of stock markets and leadership programs, mine messy with color and light. He'd tilt his head, considering my stories, and say things like, "It's cool you're so passionate. I wish I had a hobby like that." A hobby. The first small sting. So subtle, I ignored it. Matt liked that I was different. At first, he liked how I stood out at his frat parties, wearing paint-spattered jeans and thrift store sweaters, uninterested in blending in. His friends thought I was quirky. Sometimes he'd beam proudly, as if dating an artist made him interesting by proxy. I tried to ignore how his tone would shift when his parents called, how he downplayed my art, saying, "Yeah, she draws and stuff. It keeps her busy." We dated that way for over a year, through campus festivals, family holidays, where I watched, numb, as his mother looked me up and down, unimpressed, and long nights where his encouragement felt real enough that I started to believe maybe I belonged in someone's life after all. But reality crashed in quietly, almost kindly. I was offered a place in a competitive but grueling citywide mural project, something that would mean long hours, missed classes, no time for much of anything except eating, sleeping, and painting. For me, the decision should have been easy. It was a chance to work with other real artists, to have my work seen by people who understood. But as soon as I told Matt, The room seemed to shrink. He sat stiffly on the futon, lips pressed tight. "So, you're just not gonna come to the grad party? Or the interviews?" "Jess, this is a big deal for me." My mural acceptance meant I couldn't accompany him to the career networking weekend he'd planned. I tried to explain, tears in my throat, that this was my version of those big deals he always talked about, that I'd support him from afar. He looked at me, eyebrows raised, and for the first time, his voice had no softness. "You're just going to waste your time on this painting stuff? That's not ambition, Jess. That's you running from real life. When are you going to get serious?" That night, he left. An hour later, he texted, short and cold, "You're throwing away your future. I need someone I can actually build a life with." It gutted me, but the ache was familiar, almost expected, because when I came home, mascara running, paint under my nails, I received no comfort. I told my mother, Susan, with a shaky attempt at nonchalance. She merely sniffed, eyes glued to her phone, and muttered, "If you had listened to a smart boy for once, you might not be alone right now." My father didn't bother to look up from his Sudoku. My sister Amber, home from work and dressed like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, laughed from the kitchen. "You're too much, Jess. Maybe try chasing something real for once." I sat through dinner, silent, pushing food around my plate, listening to Amber recount her big promotion, and my mother gush about some neighbor's daughter getting engaged. No one asked about my mural project, or my broken heart, or even if I was all right. I might as well have been invisible. It was in those days that everything, I mean everything, tightened around my neck. There's a certain loneliness you can only feel when surrounded by people who are supposed to care. My family's house felt less like a home and more like a museum of my failures. The unused acceptance letter to art grad school, gathering dust on my dresser, sketchbooks shoved under my bed so my mom wouldn't accidentally throw them away. Amber's voice echoing up the stairs. "Seriously, grow up already." Social media, too, became a battleground. Matt's posts with his new motivated girlfriend, a finance major naturally, were paraded across my feed. Amber would comment hearts. Sometimes, just to twist the knife, she'd tag me in life coaching articles or inspirational videos about succeeding in the corporate world. Even my mom occasionally sent me links to job openings at tech companies, writing in the subject line, "You need a backup plan." I spent more time inside my room, the one place where the noise faded and where blank paper was still safe. Painting became not just an escape, but my declaration of existence. My hands shook on the bada, days, making my lines wild, but I found ferocity in my colors, a kind of angry hope. But hope, as it turns out, can be both armor and open wound. At my lowest, I tried to reach out, submitting portfolios to small galleries, applying for local exhibitions. The rejections piled up, each one another echo of my family's voice. Not good enough, not practical, not important. I started working extra hours at the cafe, wiping down counters until midnight just to buy new brushes. One night, near closing, a regular, an elderly woman named Mrs. Lin, watched me sketching on an order pad. She nodded at my tired eyes and said, "Your trouble is heavy, but your lines are strong. Don't let them take that away." It was the most genuine thing I'd heard in months, and it almost made me cry right there in the half-lit coffee shop. Still, at home, Amber barely acknowledged me, except to let loose a snide comment. Susan scolded me for slouching, for bringing bad energy, for wasting my youth. David's silence became just another form of reprimand. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I disappeared. Would anyone even notice I was gone? Besides the missing mess of charcoal on the kitchen table, there's an ache to being rootless that only those lacking a true home will understand. Love, in my life, came thinly sliced, always with conditions. Be quieter, be smarter, be less yourself. With Matt gone, I realized I'd been trying to twist myself into someone else's shape far too long. Still, I stayed, because after all, it was family. It was safe. Or so I believed. Looking back, those months before the day my family left me at the market were a slow, steady unraveling. The betrayal didn't snap all at once. It wore itself into my bones through 1,000 tiny moments. Each word, each look, each empty silence. I needed so badly for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, that wanting to make something beautiful out of pain wasn't a crime. I didn't know it then, but being abandoned by the people I loved most was, in a twisted way, fate handing me a blank page. One I would, in time, finally paint for myself. The day my family abandoned me, and my decision to stand up. I doubt there will ever be a day in my life when I won't taste the salt of that memory just by thinking about it. I thought I had felt humiliation before. The sting of my mom's scolding, Amber's endless eye rolls, the soundless pressure from Dad. But that Seattle afternoon changed the word abandonment for me forever. It was Saturday, the so-called family outing day. The plan was to visit Pike Place Market, have lunch at a new seafood restaurant that Amber was raving about, then maybe stroll along the pier. I woke up early, excited and anxious, carefully packing my sketchbook, pencils, an old Polaroid camera for reference shots, and a little hope that, maybe, something would shift between us that day. I wore my favorite jeans, already dotted with splotches of paint, and a tee with a faded sketch of Mount Rainier. As soon as I joined them in the kitchen, Amber wrinkled her nose. Mom glanced from my shirt to my hair, her mouth already opening with a complaint, but for once, she didn't say anything. I took it as a sign. I shouldn't have. The market was heaving with the usual Saturday crowds. Tourists shrieking as fishmongers launched salmon through the air. Musicians busking on corners. The air slick with scents of brine, fruit, fried dough, and espresso. My family darted through the chaos like they owned the place. Amber's heels clacked a half step ahead of everyone. Dad shuffled silently behind, his gaze fixed somewhere above everyone's heads. We stopped at every stall Amber wanted. She pointed, Mom cooed, Dad signed the receipt. At a stall overflowing with giant Dungeness crabs, I lingered to sketch a weathered vendor in yellow overalls, fascinated by his hands, which looked as ancient and cracked as oyster shells. For one unguarded minute, I let myself savor the swirl of color and life, the pulse of the market, my pencil moving almost instinctively across the paper. Amber's voice cut through, sharp as a whiplash. Jessica, seriously, you're such a child. Mom, tell her we don't have all day. I packed up fast, cheeks burning, and hustled after them down the aisle. It went on like this for hours, me following, them always 2 steps ahead, throwing glances over their shoulders to make sure I wasn't slowing them down. The air grew humid and heavy. By lunchtime, my stomach was growling, but nobody even asked if I was hungry. At some point, Amber spun around. The bus leaves at 12 sharp. Don't be late, and don't lose your stuff. Then she breezed off with Mom in tow. Dad trailed after, eyes already glazed from the crowd. I tried to keep them in sight, but Pike Place is a maze. If you're not careful, one wrong turn by a cheese shop, and you're lost in a thicket of tourists, vendors, and neon signs. I paused a moment, just off the fish counter, for a final sketch. Something about the light had changed. and I wanted to capture the shine off a bin of halibut. It took less than 5 minutes. When I looked up, my family was gone. At first, I assumed they were on the next aisle, maybe waiting by the fresh-cut flowers where Mom always lingered. I circled the main hall, scanning faces, ducking past crowds. 5 minutes, 10, maybe 15. I started to sweat. Panic bit hard as I checked the time. Already past noon. I sprinted toward the bus stop, heart in my throat. It was deserted, except for a pair of tourists consulting a map. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. One missed call from Amber. I called her back immediately. She answered on the third ring, voice clipped. "We're already on the bus," she smirked. In the background, I could hear Mom's laughter, Dad's voice, muffled, saying something I couldn't make out. "You guys left me? I'm alone. You have my wallet, my passport." I was pleading, trying to keep my voice steady as tears threatened. "You should have moved faster," Amber replied, her voice cold. Mom chimed in, unmistakable. "Jessica, you do this to yourself. Figure something out for once." Then came the laughter. It was sharp and mean, familiar as the echo in an empty house. The line went dead. My knees wanted to give out, but I couldn't cry here, surrounded by strangers buying bouquets and salmon. For a few stunned seconds, I stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. My phone battery was nearly dead. No money, no ID, my sketchbook suddenly feeling useless in my hands. I paced the street, searching the crowd for their familiar faces. My thoughts spun. Maybe this is a joke. Maybe they'll circle back, yell, "Gotcha," and hug me, proof their prank was only temporary. But as the minutes dragged on, nobody appeared. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Amber reading, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was all. The humiliation felt radioactive, burning through my skin. I tried calling again. Voicemail. I called Mom. Straight to voicemail. Dad's number rang, unanswered. The market was still moving, oblivious to the girl cut loose from everything she'd once called home. I found a row of payphones and stared at them. Anachronisms in the era of iPhones and Venmo. I dug in my pockets. Nothing but some pencil shavings, scraps of charcoal paper. I watched a father lift his young son to see lobsters in a tank, their laughter bright and sharp against the drumbeat of my heart. It struck me that these tiny moments were what family should feel like. Supportive, warm, fundamentally safe. But in my world, family meant you could be discarded for being inconvenient, difficult, not enough. Minutes stretched. My humiliation mingled with anger. I replayed every moment, racing to keep up with them, stifling my interests, wishing, always wishing, they'd see me, just once, as someone worth waiting for. Something inside me cracked. It was as if, in the echo of their laughter, in the ring of the forgotten payphone, I realized, for the first time, this is as free as I'll ever be from them. There would be no happy twist, no redemption from their side. If I didn't stand up for myself now, I never would. I squared my shoulders. I was tired of being the family scapegoat, tired of living for crumbs of approval. I took a deep, shaky breath and looked at the city with different eyes. Yes, I was broke, alone, stranded, but I was also out from under their suffocating shadow. I resolved, right there, on the cracked pavement by Pike Place Market, that I wouldn't cry or plead for their help. I would find my own way back, or, better yet, my own way forward. Around me, Seattle pulsed with possibility. If my own family could leave me behind, then maybe it was time I learned how to belong to myself. That afternoon was the death of the family I'd tried so hard to please. But it was also the birth of someone fierce, resilient, and determined to live on her own terms. And that, I decided, was something worth fighting for. Independence, the hard road in Seattle. The moment I realized I'd been abandoned at the market, something primitive inside me took over. It was survival, plain and simple. No cash, no ID, no way home, and absolutely no one to call who'd care. At first, panic gnawed at my ribs, but as my tears dried on the wind near the entrance to Pike Place Market, a small ember of defiance took root. I promised myself, if my family could so easily discard me, I would learn to live without them. The first challenge was immediate and physical. I needed shelter. With my backpack slung over my shoulder, sketchbook pressed tightly to my chest, I wandered through the city as the sun set into the bay. The neon had just flickered on. In the first salty mist was rolling off Puget Sound. I considered sleeping on a bench, but the city at night is no place to be vulnerable and visibly shaken. I stumbled upon a small, battered hostel near the wharf. Paint peeling, window full of handwritten flyers, a place definitely past its prime. The owner, Mrs. Lin, a Chinese-American woman well into her 70s, opened the door with a wary look, eyeing me from head to toe. I remember how her gaze softened when she saw my sketchbook. "You're an artist?" she asked, her accent gentle but direct. Embarrassed and desperate, I nodded and offered to draw her a portrait for a night's bed. She chuckled, a raspy, surprisingly warm sound, and nodded. We sat in the cluttered common room, and I sketched her strong cheekbones, lined eyes, the dignity in her stance. When I finished, she smiled at the drawing, then at me. "You can clean rooms tomorrow for one more night," she said, "but out by noon if you can't pay." It wasn't kindness for its own sake. It was business, but it was also, in a way, the first real opportunity someone had given me since my life fell apart. So began my crash course in survival. Early the next morning, I changed the sheets, scrubbed toilets, and emptied trash for Mrs. Lin. It was exhausting, my hands red and raw by noon. But I finished. In exchange, I got bread, a lukewarm shower, and another night on a lumpy mattress in a room shared with 2 German backpackers who snored like freight trains. But I was indoors. I was safe. When hostel money ran out, I took to the streets with my art. I set up a makeshift street gallery under the awning near Pike Place, balancing my sketchbook on my knees and laying out quick portraits for sale to tourists and passers-by. Sometimes, people dropped coins in my empty coffee cup just out of pity. At other times, I earned enough for a meal by capturing a father's gentle smile next to his kid, or the wrinkled grin of a local fish vendor. Each dollar felt like a tiny, hard-earned victory. On the best days, I might make $20, enough for bread, cheap coffee, and a bus ticket to a safer part of town if I needed it. I survived by stringing together odd jobs and luck. Mrs. Lin had a handwritten board behind her counter. People looking for help cleaning, carrying boxes, running errands, and I took on nearly everything. I painted a mural for a Vietnamese PHO shop, washed dishes at a diner, even sold some of my sketches outside the university bookstore. I spent most days dog-tired and achy, but every dollar, every meal brought a surge of pride I hadn't felt in years. Of course, there were nights when doubt crept in, thick and suffocating. I'd crash in whatever safe space I could find, staring at the ceiling and replaying my mother's dismissive words, Amber's laughter, my father's passive silence. I would imagine the 3 of them sitting around their kitchen table, gossiping about how I must be learning my lesson. But my stubbornness wouldn't let me wouldn't let me crawl back with an apology on my lips. If they want me broken, I'll show them just how unbreakable I can be. I'd mutter to myself, sometimes even out loud. Learning to exist on the city's margins changed me. I became hyper-aware of every opportunity. I paid attention to which blocks were safer after dark, which corners were best for busking, which coffee shops let you linger for hours on a single cup without getting side-eyed by staff. I learned to negotiate, whether for a higher price on a portrait or a few more hours scrubbing pots. I even made a few tentative friends among the other downtown hustlers. A saxophonist named Malik, who taught me where to find free pastries toward closing, and Sophia, a vendor selling hand-knit scarves, who let me share her umbrella on rainier mornings. My art adapted too. Before, I'd been a perfectionist, obsessed with composition and light. But surviving on the streets left no room for self-indulgence. My sketches became looser, lines bolder, the subject matter more honest. I painted what I saw: tired faces, frantic hands, the anxious joy of children tugging on their parents' arms in the market. My art became raw, immediate, a kind of visual diary of struggle and hard-won hope. When I managed to save a little, I'd splurge at local supply stores. One new brush here, a tube of vivid paint there. I bartered, trading my sketches for bagels or bus tickets. Each transaction, no matter how mundane, reaffirmed my stubborn, budding independence. I tried not to think about my family too much. When I did, it was mostly a dull ache, hardening into motivation. Sometimes, when I passed a group of tourists squabbling over directions, I'd flash back to our own trips. Amber's impatient sighs, Mom's icy commentary. But it no longer made me want to shrink. Instead, I found myself hoping, one day, they'd catch a glimpse of me, sketching on a Pike Place bench or dusting off my hands after finishing a mural. I never wanted their pity, only their recognition. But as the months went by, my need for that recognition faded, replaced by something I hadn't felt before: pride in my own solitary effort. Seattle stopped being a cold, impersonal city and slowly became a web of small victories and daily lessons. Rain felt less punishing. Crowds didn't scare me anymore. They gave me subjects to draw and reasons to stay sharp. I became, truly, my own person. For the first time in my life, every step, however shaky, however uncertain, was mine alone. With each sunrise, I survived a little more, breathed a little freer, and created something beautiful out of what my family intended to break. Finding a companion, friendship, and support. If my time surviving alone in Seattle taught me anything, it was how isolating true independence could feel. As the months passed, I grew tough, but sometimes brittle, constantly hustling and moving with a wary eye. For a long stretch, I convinced myself that I didn't need anyone. But even the most resilient heart needs a port in the storm. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, maybe a year after my family abandoned me, when I met Alex Carter. Looking back, it almost feels staged by the universe. The plaza near the ferry terminal was humming with energy, commuters hurrying for the last water taxi, vendors selling roasted nuts, and performers busking on the corner as sunlight caught the lingering mist in the air. I had set up my folding stool and a portrait's 10 sign, sketchbook balanced on my knees, exhaustion settling deep in my bones after another morning. Cleaning at the hostel, Alex wandered into my life like a bold brushstroke across a pale page. He was tallish, curly-haired, and moved with offbeat confidence that made him somehow immune to Seattle's gray chill. He plopped down beside me on the curb, harmonica in hand, a battered backpack slung over one shoulder. "You mind sharing some pavement?" He grinned, motioning to the open space at my side. "Take it," I mumbled, not looking up. I assumed he would start playing, maybe drown out my focus, maybe even poach foot traffic. Instead, he watched as I worked, really watched, with the kind of curious, non-judgmental attention I'd never gotten from my own family. A few minutes later, a mother approached, 2 children in tow. She paid me for a sketch. As the kids waited, Alex leaned over, whispering, "You always do such careful lines. Why not let 'em run wild?" It annoyed me, but I finished the portrait. When I handed it over, the mother smiled and handed me an extra $1, saying, "You two make quite a team." That made Alex laugh. A big, unguarded sound that didn't care who was listening. For the next hour, he played softly while I drew. People started to linger longer, tossing coins in a cup for him and watching my fingers fly over paper. By the end of the day, I'd made double my usual hour's take. As the sun drooped behind the skyline, Alex suggested we get coffee. He claimed the little shop across from the market sold the cheapest hot chocolate on the planet. I hesitated, but something about his easy, unstressed patience made me curious. Over mismatched mugs in a cramped cafe, he told me his own story. Raised in Chicago, he'd left home after arguing for years with parents who wanted him to get serious and follow a business major, not music. He'd crisscrossed the country, playing street corners and open mics, until Seattle called to him with its moody weather and loose-knit community of artists. It messes with your head, doesn't it? Being dismissed by the people who are supposed to love you most? He said, swirling the last of his cocoa. I nodded, embarrassed at how much I suddenly wanted to say. Maybe I gave away more than intended in that moment, or maybe Alex just understood. From that day, Alex and I became unlikely companions. It was a friendship built not on shared pasts. Ours were different enough, but on shared wounds, dreams, and a burning need to prove ourselves through art. We encouraged one another, but also challenged each other's blind spots. Alex was the first to push me outside my comfort zone. "Your work is precise, Jessica, but you never take risks. Try drawing big, let yourself mess up." He dragged me to open-air art markets. He made me promote myself instead of apologizing for my prices. "You have to set your own worth, even if nobody else does," he insisted. It was Alex who first helped me land a real mural commission. He heard a cafe owner in Belltown wanted to repaint their back wall. Alex haggled for both of us. Music for him, art for me. We worked side by side for 3 nights, sneaking glances at each other's progress and heckling while we worked. I'd never stayed up until dawn, painting before. Running on nothing but black coffee, old snacks, and the heady adrenaline of turning a blank wall into something alive. He also taught me about the business of art, how to approach gallery owners, network without selling my soul, barter with street vendors, and handle the inevitable rejections with stubborn grace. I watched him smooth-talk strangers at markets, always making genuine connections, never groveling for attention. His confidence was contagious. Slowly, I found myself talking to buyers without my chest locking up. I started putting my name on the bottom of my pieces. No more unsigned sketches. Some weeks, life was still bleak. We were both often broke, sometimes sleeping at the hostel or on friends' couches, sometimes splitting a loaf of day-old bread for dinner. But for the first time, loneliness didn't eat away at me every night. We shared everything openly: money, ideas, and most importantly, encouragement. On my worst days, when I was convinced my family was right, that art wasn't a real future, Alex would bulldoze my doubt. It's a tough world, Jess. But if we can't root for each other, who else will? Over time, our small successes wove us into the downtown Seattle art community. More and more people learned our names. My sketches showed up in the cafes, where Alex played his music. I met other artists, collaborated on bigger murals, and even sold out a street art show. Each time, Alex beaming from the front row. Our friendship never needed labels. It was, at its root, a lifeline. When I confessed my recurring fear that I'd always carry my family's rejection with me, Alex smirked. We're all haunted, Jess. You just learn to paint over the bad parts with something better. My world gradually brightened, even when the city skies stayed gray. Alex's support was never suffocating. Always a nudge, sometimes a mirror, occasionally a necessary shove. Through all the hard jobs, the freezing mornings, the laughter over instant noodles eaten on a paint-streaked stoop, I built a sense of belonging I'd never found at home. Most of all, Alex reminded me that independence didn't mean isolation, that true companionship doesn't erase old wounds, but shows you how to heal in spite of them. Through our friendship, I learned that support can be chosen, forged, and earned, sometimes on a Seattle sidewalk, over sketches and harmonica chords, with no family in sight, but a new kind of kinship growing every day, asserting myself and facing my family. 3 years can feel like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. In the years following the day my family left me stranded in Seattle, I changed in ways I once considered impossible. Independence had been hammered into me through necessity. The cold bus rides, the humiliating search for cheap meals, the relentless drive to create art, not just to survive, but to declare, I am still here. Slowly, that desperate, shivering version of me faded. What replaced her was someone braver, sharper, less afraid of being alone, and finally, ready to make peace with her own story. My first solo exhibition in Belltown was the kind of event I used to dream about through tears and self-doubt. I'd worked for months, pouring every struggle, every tiny joy, every painful memory, and hope for the future into canvas and paper. With Alex's encouragement, I'd submitted a proposal to the gallery, half prepared for the usual rejection. But the acceptance email came, followed by weeks of frantic painting, late nights assembling portfolios, and long hours promoting the show throughout Seattle's patchwork art community. Opening night pulsed with nerves and a giddy, electric kind of anticipation. It was more than an art show. It was a reckoning. People from all over the city wandered in. Strangers who'd seen me sketching at Pike Place, old cafe regulars, even Malik and Sophia from my street portrait days brought friends. Alex played soft music near the door, harmonica and guitar threading hope into the air. For the first time, I felt surrounded by people who saw not just my art, but the journey behind it. Halfway through the night, as I floated from guest to guest, taking in the awed faces, the buyers hovering near their favorite pieces, I glanced toward the entrance and felt my heart momentarily seize. There, standing oddly stiff and out of place against a wall crowded with Seattle's bohemian mix, were my parents and Amber. They wore expensive smiles and perfectly ironed clothes, their eyes darting around the room as if searching for proof that I belonged. They hesitated for a long moment before approaching.
This is it.
Amber, with her
records from
flawless
Sector
hair
4.
and calculating
He lied about
glint,
the timeline.
stepped forward first. It's impressive, Jess. We had no idea you'd made it this far, she said, her voice riding the edge between real surprise and competitive envy. My mother, Susan, squeezed my arm a little too tight. All these people, for you, your paintings are actually selling? Her tone, tinged with disbelief, carried the weight of old judgments. My father, David, hung back, hands in suit pockets. He looked everywhere but into my eyes. I tried not to flinch, not to let that old ache flare up. Tonight was not about them. It was about me, my work, and the life I'd built. One they had no part in shaping, except in their absence. Yet, as families do, they managed to find the softest places to press. Amber-eyed Alex saw how he and I moved around each other with quiet familiarity. "So he's still around," she said, as if his presence confirmed some minor misjudgment on my part. I kept my voice even. "Alex has been more family to me than anyone in this room." There was a ripple of silence, broken only by the gentle lilt of Alex's music. My parents exchanged glances, their discomfort visible. Finally, as if the words cost him dearly, my father said, "It's good to see you doing well. Maybe it's time we start over." For a second, I almost wanted to agree, to pretend the years of neglect, the market incident, all of it could be painted over like a mistake on canvas. But then I remembered the sensation of being just out of frame my whole life, never the subject, always the shadow. I looked up, letting them see the determination in my face. "You can't just show up for the finished painting and take credit for the work," I said softly, but everyone nearby heard. Amber's lips parted. My mother's eyes froze. My father took a long breath. The conversation around us seemed to hush. "What do you want from us?" Amber shot back, defensive now. "We came, didn't we? I want you to understand that your absence shaped all of this," I said, gesturing to the vibrant, chaotic, fiercely personal art lining the walls. "Everything you dismissed, the sketchbooks, the mess, the childish dreams. That's what built this night. I'm not asking to come back into the family. I'm not asking for approval. I'm asking you to let me be proud, without strings." Behind me, I felt Alex step into the small breach, his presence like a warm hand at my back. Around us, the room read the tension and quietly rallied. Buyers chatting louder, friends drawing near. My mother reached for an olive branch, the edges of her voice softening. "We did what we thought was best. Maybe we were wrong. If you want to come home now," I smiled, not with bitterness, but with new strength. "This is my home, Seattle, my friends, my art. I hope you can see why I can't fit myself back into that old box. Not after learning to build my own." A strange thing happened then. They didn't storm out. Instead, they stayed, awkward and unmoored, but present. They watched as Alex played his song for the crowd gathered in front of my biggest painting. They listened as people came up to thank me for capturing a piece of the city in my work. I saw something new in Amber's eyes. Envy, maybe, but also, for a split second, respect. When the show ended and the gallery emptied out, my family approached once more. Amber hugged me, sudden and fierce. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe it herself. My parents said nothing, but my mom lingered in front of a little piece, a painting of a lone girl sketching on a rainy market bench, and traced the signature with one delicate finger. As they left, I felt a surprising lightness. I had faced them and held my ground. The roots of old pain would always wind through my story, but they no longer decided what shape I would take. For the first time, I understood that real acceptance doesn't mean erasing the past. It means outgrowing it, letting your future speak for itself. I locked the gallery door that night with Alex by my side. Seattle's lights glittered beyond the glass, each one a tiny promise that I was not defined by the people who left me behind, but by what I chose to build with my own two hands. I was free, not because they finally saw me, but because I had learned to see myself.